Hello and welcome to IMA's Inside Talk webinar series. The title of today's presentation is Effective Planning in the Face of Changing Goals, sponsored by Jedox. I'm Adam Larson. I'll be your host for today's webinar. I just wanted to cover a couple of reminders before we get started. Please use the Q&A window on the right side of your screen to send questions to our presenters or request technical assistance. Keep in mind that refreshing your browser will correct most connection issues. In order to earn CPE credit today, you must participate completely in the live webinar by logging in on time and responding to the polling questions. At this time, I'd like to introduce our feature presenters for today's program. With us today, we have Tim Caudill. With 2 decades of domain experience, Tim brings a unique view to finance organizations about what is practical, important, and achievable. Tim, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Adam.
So next I'd like to introduce our second feature presenter. We have Rohan Kapil. Rohan has 15 years of experience in the enterprise performance management space, solving critical financial planning and budgeting problems and executing complex projects to enable ambitious growth. To learn more about both of our presenters, please take a look at the speaker bio section of your console. Rohan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Adam. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we're looking forward to a great presentation, so now I'm going to turn things over to you, Tim.
All right, thanks again, Adam. And everybody, thank you so much for joining. Rohan and I are happy to share with you some of the things that we've learned and dealt with at our careers at Jedox. And just a word about that. Jedox is an organization with hundreds of people around the globe, and we've been around for a long time. And we wake up every day helping customers grapple with some of the topics we're going to talk about today. So how do we get faster? How do we do things in more adaptable ways, but also in simple ways? And how do we integrate lots of parts of organizations into kind of a cohesive tool, a cohesive set of reporting, planning, and analytics to help businesses run better? It's a pretty fun job, and we like working here because we get to talk to folks like you. And hopefully today, some of those things that we've learned over those couple decades in business will help you think about some of the topics that are kind of challenging us today. So we're glad you're here. Happy to be a part of this great IMA session. From an agenda standpoint today, we're going to start, and I just alluded to this, some challenging times. Some changes are happening in the world. How do we react to them? That's kind of the theme of today's talk. We're going to talk about how data interacts with planning and in tackling these challenges, some planning cadence, but also some planning tips of how we can react a little bit more cohesively and quickly to challenges, and then some tools and tips and takeaways, because hopefully we can provide some bite-sized chunks and actionable information that you can think about as you go. I think one big caveat here as we go through today's talk, I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do in your business or your organization. People are much too diverse for that. So we're going to talk a lot about frameworks and ways of thinking that can help modernize and accelerate some of the things we do in the office of the CFO to get a little better. But before we do, just to get everybody involved, it's kind of like jumping up and doing calisthenics before school. We're going to have our first poll question.
All right, thank you so much, Tim. Attendees should see the first polling question now open on your screen. If you cannot see the poll question, please refresh your browser, which should correct the issue. I'd like to remind our participants, you may begin responding to each question as soon as it appears on your screen. So here's our first polling question. Did your organization implement or experience significant changes in the past year? Nah, business as usual. A few adjustments, but nothing major is changing. Or yes, significant changes. Please note after selecting the answer, you must click the submit button, which is located on the right side of your screen, just below the response options in order to successfully record your answer. So Tim, our audience is coming in and responding, and I'm sure, they're all kind of feeling what you were just mentioning, where everybody's kind of at a different space because it's been a tumultuous year for a lot of people, even just halfway through here.
Yeah, it has, Adam. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but even just from a technology standpoint, there's a lot of new technologies, ChatGPT, AI, some things that are out there, and hopefully, I'm not trying to plug those products, everybody, but that's not why I mean that. It's just things seem to be changing fast, and I know we've experienced that with our customers and just personally. So it'll be interesting to see if other people have, and if they haven't, cool, maybe that's good. So Excited to see the poll results.
Yeah, let's look at those results and see what they said here, Tim.
Okay. Yeah. That's Rohan. What do you think about those results? What you expected?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, see, from the economic conditions, everything is changing. So some industries are getting impacted a little bit earlier than the other. But you see, a very small percentage is saying, no, it's business as usual. The rest of them either have already experienced the changes, which a lot of our customers have done so as well, and some of them have made a few adjustments. As I always said, this year is different than the others. The speed of business, the changes, is really impacting all the processes across the board, which is in line with what we are seeing at our current customers as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Rohan. Thanks, and thanks everybody for participating. So let's double down on this. It's been an interesting and challenging year, a couple of years actually. And so we want to talk today about how business objectives, goals, KPIs should change in response to that. And then subsequently, are really connected and involved with that, is how in finance can we plan better? How can we facilitate this change? What does this look like? So first, let's talk about some high-level issues or conflicts and things that are happening in the world that we're all probably experiencing on some level. By no means a comprehensive list. I'm sure you have many things in your organization. We just talked about a lot of people are experiencing change. So we need to react to this. And to be frank, the quicker, the more concisely, the more relevantly we can react and provide actionable information based on these changes, the better. Okay. So when we come up against some of these things, what are we experiencing? And this will be quick because I realize most of us on the call are living this stuff, so we won't spend a ton of time. But if we think about how our goals should change in response to some of these things we've been experiencing, for example, global conflict. We've had conflict for a long time. Probably could add or replace this with pandemic, right? So the global uncertainty, conflict, pandemic that's been happening has enacted some change. And maybe you guys have done this in your organizations. I know we have heard about it. The old goal was supply chain cost. How fast and how inexpensively can I get stuff? And that was our primary focus for many years, most of my career, depending on the organization, of course, and how important those pieces and things are. Now the concept of supply chain resiliency is becoming very important. So a business goal that used to be just cost focused now probably needs to be augmented to be balancing cost and security, right? And resiliency. Similarly, inflation. I mean, we've even had webinars about inflation, right? It's not been something that most organizations had to pay a ton of attention to over the last decade and a half or so. But the last couple of years that have changed, right? Your models may or may not even have inflation built into them as you plan and report, or maybe it's just so small that you don't think about it much. But now we're faced with decisions like, do we take price increases, or do we decrease our profit, or what's the optimal dialing in of those two levers to get to the right answer? And so we need to start building those into our plans, building those into our KPIs. People planning are the same. I feel like everybody was struggling to find folks to work during the pandemic. I think some organizations are still experiencing that based on who I talk to, others not. Okay, so how do we focus on recruitment and attrition before, as many people as we can, where now it's more about attention and right sizing and maximizing the value of our workforce. And I don't want to put it in stark terms of like hiring versus layoffs. It's a cocktail of right sizing your organization and putting people in the right place, even if it's not a hire fire decision. We need to kind of think about that a little differently, right? As times change. And then rates, connected to inflation, central banks are raising rates all over, creating some cash constraints. So, the old goal might be, how do we maximize this investment? But now we need to add into that goal and KPI, how do we maximize stability too, right? How do we ensure that we have the cash reserves to do the right thing, to understand, to react to new change that hasn't happened yet? Okay, so we won't spend a ton of time here. You guys get it. Life can be tough. But it seems to be moving faster and faster, or maybe I'm just getting older. I'm not sure. It could be a little of both. But what do we do in finance? What is our role here? Okay, highly involved. So let's talk a little bit about what the CFO organization can do. And then again, we're going to jump into some other topics and actionable information and frameworks and ways to think about things. I think first is we are constantly, or should be, analyzing numbers and trends, variances, understand what's happening with the business. So we're in a really good spot to help initiate change. So when we see these things like inflation happen, when we see price pressures, when we see supply chain constraints coming, we're right there at the front to say, okay, something's going on, we need to address it. So we need to be part of, or it can be the place where change begins, so that we can react to these things. Okay, change in the goals and KPIs, but also in the planning methodology, which we'll get to. To support that change, we need to inform the organization and ourselves with data and analytics. So that term data-driven decision making is important, and data sets are growing. We've got a whole section about how to wrap our heads around that. But you know, we don't want to just guess at what these things should be. We need to back them up with data, because then we can better track and understand when it doesn't go exactly the way we thought, because there's assumptions kind of built in. With those two things, identify new KPIs. We just talked about that, you know, on the previous slide. We're involved in that process, and it's important that not only do we help identify new KPIs, we help dial in what the benchmark for that should be. We help dial in what those numbers should look like, what the plan should be. All things that we've done in the past. It's just happening more, and just you know, calling them out to be cognizant. Updating planning cadences. Is your current planning cadence enough? What planning cadence is enough? Is yearly enough for your organization? There are organizations where that's probably okay, even now. Many organizations, however, are finding that more planning cadences are necessary, and we should be able to help dial that in. Also, as always, and I'll probably say this a couple times in our presentation, so please forgive me in advance, influence and partner with the business. That is really at its core what finance should be doing, so that we can help provide focus, so that we can help quick data-driven decision-making all the way from operations up through the C-suite. If we aren't doing that because we're bogged down in the minutia of our day-to-day, we might be in trouble, because business partnering is key. It's what unlocks the finance organization to provide more value to the company. And it's also makes your job a lot more fun to get out there and understand what people are dealing with, and getting close to them and talking. So again, I don't want to spend too much time here. You guys get it. The world has been chaotic a little bit. We've got to respond, and we are right there at the front of the charge to wrap our head around these things and realign, or at least tweak, how the business and organization is going, and to deal with this effectively. Okay, so with that, we'll have another poll question. So Adam, take it away.
All right, so attendees should see the second polling question now open on your screen. If you cannot see the polling question, please refresh your browser. And you can begin responding as soon as it appears on your screen. So here's our second poll question. Does your finance organization use data effectively to influence and shape organizational goals? Finance is not consulted. It is hard to see direct impact from the data provided by finance, or finance leads the charge on setting company goals. Now, so please be sure to click the submit button, which is located on the right side of your screen. Now, Tim, this is, you know, data is a huge thing in the finance industry, finance and accounting industry. You know, sometimes some accountants are actually becoming data scientists because they want to know more about the data. You know, yeah. How do you make sure that you can tell your data? You know, maybe you're going to address this later in the presentation, but how can you make sure your data tells the story that's occurring, but not what you want it to say? Because you there's that fine line of like, hey, can you make it look a little bit better so that the board members are happy?
Yeah, I think you know, whether you're in sales or anywhere else, there's pressure there, right, to achieve goals, and how do we look through a happy lens so that, you know, we can have a better conversation with the board. I think data needs to be more clear than that. You know, when we talk about data-driven decisions, it's not massaged data-driven decisions. It's just the opposite. And so I think it's healthier, and we'll talk, and you're right, we're going to talk a lot about data and the organization of it. It's important, and it's important for just what you said, so that instead of being pressured because I don't have enough data to make it just obvious and not movable, yeah, it's an interesting conversation. So we're going to get into that here in a bit.
Here's those results, Tim. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's what I would expect. I mean, finance is not consulted. It's interesting. I'd like to talk to you guys and understand where you're coming from there. But you're not alone. And that's not the first time we've heard that, right? So I don't want to be discouraging, but it is interesting. It's great that just over half finance feels like they're leading the charge on setting company goals. And I think that's appropriate. And hopefully some of the things we talk about over the next few minutes will help you even get better at that. So Rohan, is that what you kind of thought it would break down like?
Yeah, I mean, the way I view this question is how mature your processes are around company goal settings. So it's good to see that 50% of the companies have already gone through that type of transformation where finance is a key player in setting the goals. Whereas it's concerning that the half of the companies haven't. And it goes hand in hand with the question that was asked around what do we do with the data that we want to tell the story about, or what's the reality? And probably that aligns with the 49 50% of the other ones, because I do think that having clear transparency on the KPIs is very important from top to bottom. You are only able to massage the data in your terminology only if you have the leeway to have some KPIs that were not defined. So if we are able to define and transparently communicate on how we are looking at the health of the business, then it becomes very clearly defined on how we are progressing towards those goals.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay. So thanks for participating again. We're going to keep moving on. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the poll questions sometimes kind of foreshadow what we're going to talk about. So the next section, is leveraging data effectively. And you might be feeling a bit like I just gave you a bait and switch, because how does that relate to changing planning in the face of changing business goals? I think it's because I want to think about planning kind of more in the terms of data creation. Okay. We've been part of the data creation, the data ecosystem of organizations from the start. Every time you send out a planning template, every time you send out a report, every time you communicate in the finance world, we're leveraging data, creating data. So how do we do that more effectively? I think it starts with understanding what our role is in the data ecosystem, but also know that it's growing. Okay. So what's our role, the Office of CFO in the data ecosystem? Well, first off, it actually makes sense that we're involved. If you think about our world, the world of financial statements, profit and loss statements, balance sheets, cash flows, the things that we communicate, budget versus actual analysis, business cases, we're really sitting on top of reams. Reams is a really old term, that's paper. Gigabytes and terabytes of data. Right? All of the activities of an organization in some way influence what the P&L looks like, in some way influence what the balance sheet and cash flow look like. So we're already deep into this data ecosystem, and our vantage point makes a ton of sense for us to continue and expand that involvement. Okay. What do I mean by that? So we want to, as finance, when we look at data streams, ensure they're relevant. Okay. More data for more data's sake is not what we're talking about, is not a good course. We want it to be relevant and concise, okay? It needs to be usable. It needs to be chunked up in appropriate ways. But it also needs to be aligned with the desired business outcomes. The data ecosystem, the data streams that we're creating, whether it's from planning, reporting, and everything in between, need to help drive the business outcomes. That's why we are doing these things, right? We need to understand where we can do better. I think it's also important to partner with IT, so we can help IT, be actionable. So when you've got an IT organization managing systems and data, we can actually help them connect that data and that data life cycles with the business goals and expectations. We're going to shepherd some of these things a little bit more deliberately so that things are connected from bottom to top in an organization. And some companies are now calling that a digital twin of your organization, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. We're skilled at building business cases for goals, goal changes, and justifications, right? We've already have been trained to back up and do some data-driven decision making. We're going to apply those tools to understand what data we want, where it needs to be, how we need to interact with it. But then also in the next slide, we'll talk about, what's the value of it and how do we justify certain things. And most importantly, again, act as trusted advisors so that we can connect the numbers to the business activities. So we're talking about changing business goals. The whole point of a business goal is to get people rowing in the right direction, to get people acting in the right ways. We're going to help with that. We're going to help connect these numbers to activities, and I think that's key. Back to the business case idea, data has immense value. So there might be some investment that happens to rationalize and organize these data streams, probably will be. Even if you don't purchase a tool, just putting a framework in place and putting work effort towards making it happen costs money. So how do we quantify that? Well, data is kind of tough to quantify. So you can use traditional intangible asset methodologies, and kind of get an idea maybe, but it's a little opaque. And I think it's important to focus on how the data is impacting the organization, how the data is relevant, how the data is concise, like we talked about before. Is it usable? And so how do we source data? Where does it come from? And how do we organize it in a way that can achieve some of these things that we're talking about? Well, the first thing is to realize data is everywhere. I don't know, maybe you thought of template collection in a forecast or planning cycle as creating data before, or maybe this is kind of a new way to think about it for you. But it's important to understand it comes from everywhere. So traditionally, if we're just doing reporting, we're going to grab data from an ERP in finance, maybe some HR data and other things like that, and bring them into our data stream and ecosystem of reporting. But it's important to note, and I talked about this earlier, some data needs to be created and sourced from people in the business. So great insights are everywhere from top to bottom in an organization. How do we tap into those and use them more effectively, right? How do we mobilize them quicker? How do we make faster decisions? Because there's information on the shop floor that can inform capital expenditures, that can inform lots of different things. The expected life of a machine might be different than the people who use it who know it's about to break, is what I'm getting at. And so what we need to do is continually create data and curate and collect data throughout the organization. And that's really what planning is. But also talking about connecting planning to operational planning and operational data and things like that. And more and more organizations are doing that. When I talked about the vantage point of the Office of the CFO, those data streams are informing the P&L. Well, what if we could connect them all to the P&L so that when we identify trends and changes in granular data, we can see what that looks like faster? And that's what we're talking about here. Understand data is everywhere, and we need to figure out what data is relevant and important. And then we need to figure out how we can capture it and use it in effective ways. And that is just as important, okay? So how do we do that? Well, first, here's an example of a potential framework. And this isn't perfect, and you could tweak it for your organization. But it's important that we consciously participate in the data lifecycle. Whether you consciously thought about this or not, we've been doing it. But we can help, whether it's IT or just in other parts of the business, put frameworks together for data lifecycle so that we can identify, get, and use data effectively. And here's an example of what that could look like. So when we think about getting data, collection. So collection of data could be planning templates like we keep talking about. It could be tapping into a source system. It could be a lot of things. But before we collect data, or part of that step, it's important to create a data strategy, right? Because just throwing more data at a problem is kind of like throwing more money at a problem. It might not solve the problem and it gets very expensive. So we want to have a strategy, right? We also want to understand data types. We just kind of talked about that a little bit. It's key to understand where data lives, what type of data it is, and also is it numbers? Is it word type data and insights that come through comments? How do we combine those things intelligently? So there's a lot of data types out there too, not just data sources and places. And I think key is granularity. So what we're finding in the marketplace, and Rohan will probably talk about this in a minute, data granularity keeps getting more and more and more granular. Or another way to look at that, data keeps growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. There's more and more and more data. And so we need to decide what granularity makes sense for us in our planning process, what granularity makes sense for us in our reporting process and analytics as well. And it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. you can take a large data set and curate it differently for different parts of the organization as part of your data stream so that the granularity is appropriate, right? And then data creation. We need to create it. We need to grab it. We need to import it. We need to get it from somewhere, right? So that's the collection phase. Then we've got to publish it. And part of this step, and it could be kind of overlapping collect and publish, is quality. Bad data is awful. Bad data can ruin your day, ruin your company, maybe even ruin a marriage or something. I don't know. But it's really dangerous. And so what we want to make sure is that the data that we publish is quality. So checks, validations, alerts, repeatable audits, making sure that the data stream is great. And then part of publishing and part of use is accessibility, right? You can have the best stuff in the world, amazing data ecostructure, great planning techniques and tools. If nobody knows about them or can't get to them and you haven't communicated them, they're worthless, right? And the communication is key. So when you look at something, if you look at it the wrong way, or you haven't been communicated to about how to look at it, you can draw false assumptions on it or think that it's wrong and hurt its credibility because you don't understand what it's saying. So the communication of data streams and reporting is paramount. And then we need to continually gauge its impact. We just talked about data having value. It does have cost, okay? So we need to continually assess the impact of the data streams that we're creating. We need to continually identify gaps and adjust as necessary. And through this process, we may find that we need to kick off a new data cycle for a new data stream, or that we need to rethink about the one that we're talking about. And this blue kind of chevron bar could really be a circle, but I'm not great at PowerPoint, so this is how it looks. But these things are living processes that evolve over time. And it's helpful to think of them as a framework so that you can have a mind for, before you just put data out there, does this fit our strategy? Is this the right granularity, right? Did I get it from the right place? Is it quality, trustable data? Do people understand it? Do they know where to get it? All right, questions you should ask often. I think when we're thinking about data streams, and we talked about a lot of different places to get data, planning data, data from systems, those are traditionally probably already on your radar. One that should be on your radar and probably is in some way is third-party data. Internal data is easier to get. You can probably call your IT partner and they can say, hey, yeah, I get that query for you tomorrow, no problem. Tapping into third-party data is more interesting. And it's something that in finance and really just in business, we've always done. You understand the business environment you're in. You understand where you do business. You understand your customers. You understand a lot of things. But do you have data to back up those insights, to prove that your biases aren't getting in the way, to prove that there really is a connection to this forecast that you've been using in your plan? So we need to get third-party data and identify and quantify how relevant that data is internally. And so what do I mean by that? If you're in construction, population growth, housing starts, there's all kinds of reporting and forecasting that might live outside of your organization that are extremely relevant to your planning. And to the extent that you can tap into them, and whether you use AI or integrations, automatically connect them to your data is key. This last point, AI automation, unfortunately, AI has probably been a bit of an overused term. It's the subsequent term from digital transformation, which was probably also a bit overused. But despite getting bombarded with those terms, they are very important. And AI, despite a lot of hype over the years, is becoming very real and usable and easy. So think about an AI system that can reach out and connect to 1,000 different pieces of data. So your driver-based ecosystem goes from 50 or 100 drivers to thousands of them. And oh, by the way, they're automated. So as the third party changes, you get alerts, reports, you're planning immediately on those changes. So there's some interesting things and interesting ways to get data. And I think the reason I started our talk with this is in finance, to take a step back, stop thinking about making planning templates so much and start thinking about what would be perfect in my organization. Do we have the data we need? Do we have the third party, internal data? Do they talk to each other? Is it easy? Is it hard? Do I trust it? And so this is to kind of try to keep an open mind and try to understand that there is more out there to use to help us adjust when we find uncertainty in the world. There's more data, there's more tools, there's more way to automate and quickly identify how we should adjust to face those goals. And so this is some of the things Jedox does. So if they sound a little passionate, forgive me. But I think it'd be cool to hear a story about this because this is part of what we do. And so Rohan is really close to customers, and I don't know if you read his bio, but part of his whole job is to help customers as they take this journey and shepherd them through and understand their challenges. So Rohan, from your perspective, I'd love to hear some comments about data and these things.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. I mean, I believe that data is only as good as the information that you are able to extract out of it. Let's start with that. Now, the problem happens in reality that sometimes Office of Finance understands the drivers but don't know what is the amount of significance a driver holds. Most of us just go with certain drivers that have existed for years. Now, with the advent of AI, what we are able to draw upon in current customers is the significance of the driver. So, for example, one of the customers that we have, they are looking at all the Twitter data for the partners that they have in the market who are selling on their behalf, and they are trying to judge by the hashtags what is the sentiment of a partner. Are they really happy with the customers machinery? Are they not? And are they going to be able to achieve the goals from a sales perspective they have set with the partners? That's one area. The other area of AI is we got into this hotel chain who wanted to use the tourism, the travel data in regards with the amount of bookings they would see in their system. So they knew very clearly what type of data they want to bring in and what information they want to use out of it, and they were able to grow their forecast to a 99% accuracy. So think of the type of cost savings they had when they deployed that AI. Now, another question arises out of it is, hey, do I need to be a data scientist to be able to use that? I mean, some part of data knowledge is always good, but with new tools like you have all used Chat GPT in past few months. I mean, everyone is using it. Look at that type of an interface. How cool it is to really just type in a question and that AI model that is built on it gets you information from all the different sources. Attach that to your current way of planning and budgeting in or forecasting or analysis in finance, and you get to a different level of your information that you are able to extract using the third party as well as your internal data sources. So definitely there is a lot that can be achieved by using third party data until the time we are very clear in what we want to extract in terms of this data knowledge. We are able to easily achieve that and help that process as well. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Rohan. Those are some fun stories. I remember them. All right, that brings us to our next poll question. So, Adam.
All right, so we've arrived at our third polling question. So attendees may respond as soon as it appears on your screen. So here's our third polling question. Do other departments contribute to the planning process? Nope, finance creates the plan. Yes, but at a high level. Or fully collaborative across all departments. Please take a moment and submit your answer and click the submit button on the right side of your screen next to the response options. So, just based on what you've been saying, and, if you read articles in any finance magazine, the finance team has to be the business partner to help collaborate. That's like the ideal thing. But I'm sure that people at different times, depending on what's going on, may have different answers in their organizations.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's partly almost a culture thing too. So is the culture that finance crunches the numbers and tells me what I have to do, or is the culture that we came to this number together? I have some pretty strong opinions on which one we're supposed to do. So it'll be interesting to see what people are doing. But I don't want to criticize people who have a different model, right? Again, a lot of these things are about right sizing for you. But to me, I think it's healthier to kind of be really collaborative. Rohan, I think you'd agree that that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, let's look at the results. It's pretty much in the standard format that we see, right? That in regards with the collaboration, it needs to happen. There is no excuse around it, right? The reason why it doesn't happen in certain cases is more aligned with the fact that the process is not that mature that it allows. And both sides of the coin are important. You have to do the top-down planning, which then needs to be supplemented with the bottom-up planning as well, because the drivers of how finance looks at things from a P&L perspective is different than how sales is looking at things, how HR is looking at things. So it needs to be a fully collaborative and immersive procedure, because now the CFO needs to answer not only from a finance perspective, but from a strategy perspective as well. And that is what we see. 50% of the companies are fully collaborative across departments, and some of them are just doing it high level. So definitely, I mean, what is the option B needs to go to option C, and the option A definitely needs more process maturity as we go into the planning forecasting cycle across the company.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys, and thanks everyone for participating. Yeah, so we're going to talk about planning now, and we're going to talk about a lot of topics. The first one we're going to start with is planning cadence. How much planning is appropriate for your organization? How much planning can you do? Also, we're going to talk in this section too about some techniques and some characteristics of planning that are better suited to achieve the goals that we're talking about how better to react to quickly changing situations. We're going to talk about some things like scenario modeling and things that help us get there. Okay. So how much should you plan? I can't answer that question for you on a webinar, right? It depends on your business. It depends on your data ecosystem. It depends on your tools. It depends on the capabilities and the desires of the organization to do more or less, right? How much can you plan? How often can you plan? Well, there's some new things happening in the world that Rohan and I have experienced. There are people implementing continuous planning, right? And if you're struggling to do a quarterly forecast, you might want to be angry at that right now, because you can't imagine the level of work that it would take to constantly plan. But we're going to talk about how you can achieve it. And even if you don't do continuous planning, because I want to be clear, it maybe doesn't make sense for everybody. The same tools that allow us to unlock this allow us to plan more, to plan better, to plan into more appropriate granularity. So the same tools that automate and enable this are the same tools that we can use even if you only want to do a quarterly forecast or a monthly rolling forecast. But there are people who are collecting insights both from systems and the business on a continuing basis, and continually updating plans and updating course corrections as new data comes. Now, this doesn't work for all data, right? Accrual-based accounting has some things that happen at month end that make that data, not as usable, but there are transactions happening that you can understand. There are data like flash sales reporting or market insights or news even that we can continuously react to. And we often don't want to wait a quarter to do that, or a month even, or maybe even a week. And so this idea of continuous planning exists. I talked to a lady at a conference the other day. Her organization doesn't even forecast and budget anymore. They're literally running their business on KPIs and reacting to cash positions and objectives and constraints. And it's kind of wild, and it's kind of neat to talk to. So the answer is you can plan all the time, but it's not a prescription to do that. You need to dial in your cadence, okay? Because stale data isn't useful, and how quickly your data goes stale, well, it depends on you and what you're doing and what the data is, and that's why there's no prescription. But the idea of continuous planning is actually even more though than what we're doing now. So if you think about the budget and forecast cycles, a lot of times when people create a budget, it's more granular and detailed than the forecast update, right? This is doing more with less effort so that we can continually plan a fuller granularity, a fuller, larger data set. So it's an expanded view of sending out budget templates, an expanded view of forecasting. And the fly in the ointment here, if you will, or the difficulty, is that this has the potential to be impossible or to create so much workload that people hate it, right? And so, for example, if it takes you 2 months to do a forecast and your supervisor says we need to do monthly forecasting, you have a problem, Okay, so we need to think about automation. We need to think about some things, and we've got a whole section to help give you some tips and tricks to put the pieces together about how to think about the tools required to do something like this. And again, whether you want to go to a rolling forecast or this interesting continuous planning methodology, we're going to give you some tips to do that. I think another part of effective planning, and it should be part of your planning cadence that will help you tremendously with uncertain times, is scenario modeling. Okay, you might already be doing this in some form or fashion, but it's hugely important. So let's talk about why. So traditional FP&A, so the yearly budget or the quarterly forecast, it has a predictability span. And the farther out in the future that you go, the less predictable things are, okay? Well, here's what's tough. Because of the volatility in the world that we've been talking about, that predictability span is shrinking. So we're able to predict not as far out into the future as we could, which is really difficult to sign multi-year contracts with, really difficult to understand how much to purchase for 9 months from now because it has to be shipped overseas. So we need techniques to handle this, to know that the old school way of thinking at a higher level isn't enough. And so how do we plan outside the predictability span? That's scenario planning. So what if in 12 months a government regulation changes? What if in 12 months there's supply chain constraints? What if I single source something from a supplier versus dual source? What do those things look like? And understanding these things help give an organization a playbook to react faster. So we're continually updating our plans, but we're even expanding that and saying we're continually updating our scenarios that live in those plans so that we can understand where we want to do and then pick the one that we think is going to be best and present that as a plan while keeping these around so that we understand what they'll do. So essentially it's if you think about driving, you want to get to a destination. If there's an ice storm, you may want to know a couple different routes, right? Because that road you're on might get closed. And I know that's kind of a silly example, but that's what we're talking about here. Understanding what they are is great. So scenario modeling today, about 6% of organizations can run scenarios in real time. 13% can in less than a day. But here's what's interesting. A full 55% say it's a long and challenging process, and 26% of organizations can't scenario plan at all. Okay. So what are some characteristics to look for to move some of those folks into that top bullet point? Well, first, scenario planning and planning in general needs to be automated and fast. Like we can't just crank out spreadsheets harder, right? We need to create a driver-based ecosystem so that changes in one part of the business are cascaded to the rest of the business so we get a full view of the impact. And another part of that is they need to be multidimensional. The data sets and granularity of planning and operation, logistics might be different than production, might be different than sales, definitely different than SG&A. But these all have to live cohesively together in a multidimensional environment so that we can understand that broader view. And it's important to have continued vigilance. Keep up with your scenarios. Understand these impacts. Watch out for changes. Watch out for when your data doesn't make sense, because that means maybe you don't have enough of it or you got something wrong. Okay, so constantly be looking through scenario models so that we can have a playbook for the future. I think some other things to think about in planning are quality assurance. We mentioned this in the data lifecycle. Absolutely true. We need to know that what we're looking at, whether it's plan data, the actuals that we use to make plan data, the data that we use to analyze variances, actuals versus plan, we need to make sure that that's quality information. So we need to build in validations. We need to build in data governance. So you should be able to lock down the budget when it's submitted so it doesn't move around, for example. We need sign off. We need the business to own their plans. We need management to agree to their plans. We can systematize a lot of these processes to be quicker and more cohesive and more trackable and auditable. And that will help in communication. We need to know and communicate what that data is so people know how to consume it appropriately. Another key feature, and I mentioned this before, so sorry if I sound like a broken record, to plan more doesn't mean just work harder, right? It means use automation. And your automation should involve integrations. So you should be able to tap into multiple data systems and rationalize that data. It should have validations. We just talked about that. Automatic alerts. If something's wrong or if there's something you need to know that would kick off a new planning cycle, you can automate some of those things. template management and workflow are key and kind of low-hanging fruit. So what we're talking about here is if you're creating manual templates for people to fill out, emailing them, putting them in shared folders, communicating via email and phone, cobbling them back together, not very efficient process. We can automate that entire process and connect it to workflow. So automated emails, links to things, tracking of approvals, locking down data. This all can be automated. And the whole idea of this is not only to plan sometimes more granularity more often, but at the same time, be able to free up time for finance to provide more value-added activities, right? I always tell people we didn't go to school to make spreadsheets. It's not why we went to finance and accounting school, right? And I think key to everything that we've talked about today, we're going to keep talking some more, providing value. Your plan should provide value, not just to the C-suite, but also to operations so that it can inform their KPIs so that they can track to what they're doing. A P&L is not enough anymore. It needs to be much more robust. People should come to you when they don't have to. People should not be frustrated when you send them a template to fill out, okay? If they are, we might be doing it a little bit wrong or not providing enough return on value for them. And so at Jedox, we try really hard to make sure that everything we do is balanced with value and provides value. So Rohan, it'd be cool if you could just tell a story about how we've done that.
Yeah, I mean, there are many facets to value. There is a short-term value, there is a long-term value. So, what we mostly end up doing with our customers across the board is we define the key objectives in the short term and then phase it out in regards with the long-term vision that the CFOs have put in place. Now, for the more mature companies, we can start directly from a very granular aspect on things. However, the customers which are not so mature, we sort of consult them on how to build those processes over time. At the end, any type of data integration or data usage in the company has to be mapped to a value proposition that it's providing. And once you are able to do that, then it becomes easier to do the change management internally because you are able to show value across the board with each department coming into picture. And that's a general way of how we approach at Jedox pretty much every implementation or consultation that we are doing with our customers.
Thanks, Rohan. I think that brings us to our next poll question. Oops. Uh-oh. Clicked the wrong thing. One moment. There we go.
Here, I put it up for everybody, Tim. All right, so here's our fourth and final poll question. What tools do you use for planning, reporting, and analytics? We just use Excel augmented by software tools. We have a fully integrated software stack for these items, or other. So please be sure to click the submit button, which is located on the right side of your screen, just below the response options, in order to successfully record your answer. So I'm sure it'll be interesting to see where our audience is at with all these different tools, because there's so many different options for people these days.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the answer, Rohan. It's interesting because often when people come to us, they're in Excel and want to change or Excel augment with something else and need to understand how to wrangle things better. I think it's important to know that Excel is not going anywhere, right? And even in the folks that are really advanced with their technology and things, they still use Excel, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just making sure it's used appropriately, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because I was just at another conference where there was a sort of survey that was showing already that even though we have been speaking about reporting analytics tool for a while, even now 60% of the companies just use Excel, and the rest also are divided amongst some of the augmentation that's done by software tools, but very few have an XP&A or extended planning, integrated planning composition. So let's see the results in that case, Adam, and see where we are at.
All right, here's the results.
Well,
what I expected, yeah.
Pretty much saying the same positioning that I had to say as well. That sometimes even the Excel provides some of the tools like pivot tables and some initially built-in tools which are augmenting, but those are still creating a little bit of silos as I see in the customer zone. And in order to move to a fully integrated and transparent solution, that is where the breed of EPM or enterprise performance management systems like Jedox comes into play. And it's a journey at the end of the day that we keep on seeing pretty much with each customer. And definitely in line with what I have seen in the past outside, it shows the bell curve pretty nicely that way.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And thanks, everybody, for participating. I'm not shocked by these results. And so let's talk some more about how we can put some of these concepts into motion. And I did a time check, so we're going to run through these a little fast because Adam told me I talked too much. Thanks, Adam. No, he didn't. I'm just kidding. But we want to give you guys some tools and tips, because a lot of what we talked about today is just conceptual, right? Think about planning more often. Think about planning in more granularity. Think about connecting operations to your plan. Think about getting more data from different places. That's a lot. So we wanted to take a section and just give you some things to think about how you can implement something like this. And I think the first one is to create a vision. It's so much easier to achieve a goal when you've mapped out what it is. So create a vision for how you develop KPIs, how you identify data streams. Create a vision for benchmarking both externally, like with trade organizations and peer organizations, but also internally, benchmarking different departments and activities. I think creating relevant reporting is key. We talked about that a little bit. And also taking this vision and turning it into a framework for change, a framework for self-evaluation. I think one of the most important takeaways today is that we should always, and hopefully are already, consulting with operations. So what activities need to improve? Do we have KPIs and goals that incentivize that? What does providing value even look like to the folks in operation? Is finance doing it? Do they find you valuable? If not, you need to consult with them and understand how to change. What's the optimal timing for information sharing, right? If you're hitting somebody 16 times a day with notifications, they're going to ignore it. What works for them? And then self-service. You may not want to give everybody self-service. However, certain places need to be able to slice and dice their own data, make their own reportings, but you need to right-size that for your audience. Some people are running a dangerous machine. You know, they don't have time to learn these other tools. So maybe what you give them is just what they need. So the idea of minimum viable product there is key. You don't want to overwhelm people. Data and systems integrations are key. I just talked about terabytes of data all living together in harmony and informing a plan from finance. Tough to do that manually. So we need to understand our data, always analyze it, and use data systems and automation to strive for one source of the truth. You need a place where people can get information that they trust on a regular basis. Otherwise, all of these efforts are kind of for naught. In line with systems integration, leverage modern tools. We just did this pulse, so it's pretty neat. The number's almost spot on, a little different. 58% of organizations polled last year said they use Excel as their main planning and forecasting tool. Okay, it's tough if that's all you have to do some of the things we're talking about. Some of the data streams we talked about will crash your Excel spreadsheet, right? Maybe some of you experienced that. 31% don't have a single source of data that everyone trusts. That's a scary number to me, to be quite frank. I've been in boardrooms where people are arguing about which spreadsheet we should be using. They're not very productive meetings, okay? So that's something we need to attack. And this, 46% of C-suite teams have online access to real-time performance. So a little under half, but they're looking at stale data is what that tells me often. Or maybe it's right-sized data for them, but it's not real-time. Okay, so modern tools are key, okay? What do we want to think about when we're purchasing modern tools? What do we want to think about when we're designing these things? I think focusing on adaptability is key. Multiple source systems. Easily being able to tap into new ones or different ones or change things. Being able to take lots of information and transform them and map them into cohesive, multidimensional models that give you the answers you need, that allow you to scenario plan, do sensitivity analysis, that allow you to do things lightning quick. Leveraging AI algorithms is becoming really important in lots of the organizations we work with, highly relied upon to get good data and good planning. In fact, you can almost automate a good portion of a plan, or at least get a good cut of it and build in your assumptions. It's becoming very usable. Reporting capabilities are key. Right reports, right places, right granularity, right time. And we already talked about self-service and ad hoc. When you're looking at these tools, have a mind to these topics and make sure that they're addressed appropriately, but also in a way that fits into your data strategy and the ecosystem that you're trying to create, right sized for your business. And I think that's key. These aren't one size fits all tools, but these are some one size, I don't want to say one size fits all, but these are some universal kind of things to think about as you're choosing the tools to unlock, some of these things that we're talking about. Communication, best plan is worthless in a vacuum. It needs to be relevant, right frequency, as simple as possible, and more importantly, be perceived as trustworthy. If you don't have these things, everything we've talked about today isn't going to be very impactful. So from key takeaways, corporate goals are changing very quickly. It's vital to use data to create and track goals and objectives. Collaboration with the business unlocks better information and better buy-in to the goals. And then also tools enable more agile processes, right? So we can't do a lot of what we talked about today manually, just grinding things out. Also fostering transparency with great communication. And key, and maybe this should have been the first takeaway, is unlocking the value of the business partner mindset. If your planning cadences, processes, data delivery, and reporting don't make the business run better, then you might need to think a little bit more about what how you're architected. Okay, I ran a little bit over, so I apologize, and I was hoping to have one more good conversation with Rohan, but we can talk offline later. So we'd like to open it up and see if there are any questions with the last few minutes that we have.
Thanks so much, Rohan and Tim. It's been a great presentation. And attendees should see a survey open on their screen. As we're talking through some Q&A, I would just encourage you guys, please, we love your feedback. So fill out that survey that's open on your screen as we're talking, and use the Q&A window on the right side of your screen to send us questions if you have any questions. And we'll be happy to respond to as many as we can in the last few minutes that we have. So we've had a few people kind of talking about, you've been talking about data and giving the right data. We've had some people just send some questions and just how can they get more involved in supporting, like, let's say you're not a VP, you're not at a CFO level, and you want to support your CFO and VP in that decision making process using the data that you're providing. How can you be a better partner to supporting the higher ups in your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for that. I think that building a business case for it, understanding the data behind it, and just communicating it. Great ideas come from all around the organization. It doesn't have to all come from the C-suite. I think it's key that you do feel empowered to identify things. But before you bug your CFO or your finance VP, equip yourself with data. Make sure you understand what needs to happen and have a good story for why. Just like you build a business case for everything else. And that's a really effective way to kind of raise these KPIs and issues and actually get some movement from them. Because if you do your business case right, it's usually a slam dunk, and unless there's other kind of mitigating circumstances, people will jump on board and can actually really impact some change, even if you're not at really high levels in the organization. All right. What else do we have there?
Here's another question. People are, you spent a little time talking about third-party data and the importance of integrating it. What are some typical sources of that third-party data, and what about security around that?
Rohan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, definitely I can answer. I mean, the sources depends on the business. So let's say we have one customer at the moment who are delivering water to households. In their case, they are utilizing weather.com's data forecast to see whether it's going to snow or it's going to rain, and are they going to make the delivery. So it depends on what do you need as a source, because the APIs are available pretty much for everything these days. Now, in terms of security, since we are living in a world full of APIs and there is a lot of security built in, you can work with your department, the IT department, to ensure that you are exposing only those points of access which are secured already. So gone are the days when you had to open up your whole system in order to bring in that data. Now, with the advent of APIs, we are able to securitize the endpoints that are connecting. So I'm getting a little bit technical, but the security has really increased over the past few years because as the need developed to get the third party data, so the need developed to secure it as well. And we are in good position at the moment that we see everywhere.
So this has been a wonderful conversation, and I would love to keep going, but we all have other things to do today, and we don't want to be respectful of everybody's time. So Rohan, Tim, I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. We're very appreciative for the time you've made for IMA and for our audience. It's been a great conversation. Really excited to have it today.
Thanks a
I
lot.
again want to thank Jedox for sponsoring today's webinar, and thank you all for your participation in today's event. If you've met the requirements for CPE, you can access your certificate today by clicking the CPE icon at the bottom of your console or before the webinar concludes, or by selecting the CPE credit link on the right side of your post-event email. Finally, your credit will be automatically entered into your transcript. I look forward to spending time with you again soon when we'll enjoy some more Insight Talk in the future. Have a great day, everybody.